Rising interest rates dealt another setback to property prices in June, and a growing number of buyers are looking interstate. And Flaherty, economist at REA Group, joins me now. And the Reserve Bank has lifted the cash rate twice this year and is widely tipped to do so again next week.
It is. We do expect to see the Reserve Bank move interest rates for a third consecutive month. This is already impacting property prices. We've seen 2 consecutive months of declines across Australia so far. The more expensive markets, Melbourne and Sydney and Canberra, have been hardest hit. But it's actually not the same story everywhere. So we're still continuing to see some price rises in markets like Adelaide and Perth.
What's likely to happen, do you think, with the Reserve Bank? Will they go as much as they did last month, do you think?
It's a good question. I think most people are tipping that it's going to be between 25 to 50. They've said themselves that, a rise of around 75 points would be off the table. Though, of course, the Reserve Bank haven't necessarily been very consistent in their messaging over the last few years. So we'll see.
Yeah, certainly feel for people who are under immediate strain, because it is a bit of shock and awe, there's no question. What's likely to happen to property prices, do you think?
Look, we don't think that prices are finished falling yet. If interest rates continue to rise, as we do expect them to, the cost to borrow is going to increase for people, which means that they can't borrow as much. So, of course, that would put that downward pressure on property prices. The question is how much they're going to fall, and I think that will be largely dependent on the speed and the size of those interest rate rises that we see over the next 12 months.
There definitely seems to be an immunity in that higher price range, and you would expect that to probably continue, because there's a lot of money in the community, and still records are being broken in certain spots in Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the unique things about the property market, isn't it? The fact that, every suburb, every different type of property is in a sense its own market. So what we see broadly across the country isn't necessarily going to hold true in certain markets. And I think particularly those kinds of properties that are quite rare, that are, sort of a bit more niche, could be more resilient.
Given prices are still so much more affordable in places like Adelaide and Perth, could we see more interstate buyers look to these markets, do you think?
Yeah, and we are already seeing this. So if we look at people based in New South Wales, for example, the number who have been searching to buy property in South and Western Australia has actually increased substantially. So we've seen a 90% increase in searches to buy property in South Australia from those based in New South Wales. It's a very similar trend in Victoria. We're seeing a lot more Victorians search interstate as well. And I think you can see that it makes sense in the sense that a price of a unit in Melbourne and Sydney is actually more expensive than the price of house and land in WA or SA. The other thing is that those markets also tend to offer a higher amount of rent relative to the price of the property. That is, they have a better yield. So from an investor's perspective, you can see that property in Adelaide and Perth might be starting to add up a little more.
Often property investors get a bad rap when many times it's Australians who are using it as part of their super, and they buy an extra property and they rent it out. And they've struggled a bit over the last couple of years because they've had to give rent relief. But right now, rent is going through the roof. Do you think we'll see a growth in investors?
Well, we have started to see investment activity pick up. What happened actually over the last 2 years is with those really strong capital gains, even though there were more investors buying, there were even more investors selling, which actually reduced that total stock of rental properties. And that's part of the reason why we're actually seeing such strong rent growth. There are just fewer rental properties available. Add to that the fact that the average household size has decreased slightly because of the pandemic. Now, I think that with rents rising, property investors might feel a bit more encouraged to take that leap. I think especially if you look at the stock market, which has been so volatile over the last couple of years, some people are thinking, where's the safest bet for my money? Where am I going to get that good income?
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because interest rates, even though they're going up, I think back, and I'm a lot older than you, to when I first bought a property, and the interest rates were, large double digits.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, even though we're seeing interest rates rise relative to historic levels, they are still very low. And, even though this is going to be a harder hit for people that bought recently, for those who are locked in for a while yet or who purchased their properties a few years back, the interest rate scenario is still quite positive.
Good on you, Anne. Have a lovely weekend.
You too.